Welcome to Speed, Stability, and Benchmarking. It's nice to see some familiar faces in the crowd. Many of you I've met at Pause. Some of you are brand new. How many of you this is your first DevCon or Engage conference? Really?
You didn't know that.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. We're going to do formal introductions here in a minute. I just want to give you a quick little story. I went to my first FileMaker DevCon in Phoenix in 2017. I met some of the people there that put me on the path to Proofgeist, which is where I work now. And I haven't been to another conference until today. This is my second conference. I'm thinking, so for those of you who have felt like I'm not ready for this, I'm not either, but I'm up here and I'm going to give it a try. So just be patient with me as I figure this out. Our slides and our demo file will be available in the community. So you guys should feel free to download those and play around with them. We're going to cover a lot in the presentation itself, but obviously we can't cover everything in the 45, 50-ish minutes that we have here. While Apple does have a policy against video recording or live streaming, you can take photos for personal use. So please feel free. Anything that pops up on the screen or anything that we're talking about, feel free to take your photo out and just take a picture for easier reference. We're happy to talk about things later.
I just downloaded all your slides and files. They're available at the session materials link on the page already.
Awesome. Thank you.
So that's the end of our talk.
So my name is Heather Williams. I am a software engineer at Proofgeist. I've been there for about 6 years. I grew up north of the Adirondack Mountains in New York State, if anybody knows where those are. And the interesting part was I was so far north to the Canadian border that I could actually see Canada from my bedroom window. So when I tell people I'm from New York, I'm like, I'm from Canada, New York. I now live in Grand Rapids, Michigan with my husband and my daughter. Go blue, go green. I have had a lot of different positions in my life. I'm actually a trained teacher, so I taught for many, many years. I've been a super sales consultant, a board member, a volunteer. And I first got introduced to FileMaker in 2015. I was working at an Ivy League institution. My job that I had there at the time got cut. And I transitioned over to a new office in the role of a department coordinator. They had an in-house solution there. I knew nothing about FileMaker. My only database experience at that point was Microsoft Access, and that had been 10 years before then. So, I was starting from scratch. That position and that opportunity led me to go to my first DevCon for training. And you've heard that part already. I love Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, especially the shakes. And I'm a hugger. If you need a hug, please come find me. I will hug anybody. And I'm also a knitter. So if you see me later with knitting needles, it's a thing. And I love to share dad jokes. We've had a few on our Vesta board over at the Proofgeist booth so far. I have not written any of those, but you'll have a few treasures here this morning. So hey, Dirk, what do you call a mom who tells dad jokes?
He has not told me the answer to this. All are proud. I don't know.
A parent. So we're going to talk a lot today about how, performance equals success. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Hi, guys. I'm Dirk Reynolds. This is my first conference here, but I'm so very happy to be here with Engage. Sorry. But I have been a FileMaker developer for many, many years. Version 2, mid to early 90s. I joined Proofgeist last year, working with them for several years before that. And I've known some of them for, decades now. I'll tell you a little bit about my journey with FileMaker, because I think it's going to be similar to what you guys have. So back in the day, with 1994, 95, I started my first company. And FileMaker is dear to me because it's given me a career. I've always been interested in computers, but basically I didn't really know what I was doing. And FileMaker is like, oh, this is great. So HyperCard and FileMaker, and it's like, oh, I don't need to do any Excel sheets. And I used to dabble in Lotus, 1, 2, 3, all those things back when. But FileMaker is like, that's it. So it's given me a career, which is just wonderful. Another thing I love about FileMaker is that it allows me to meet all these people, Heather, all of you guys, everyone approved, but also all my clients. And they touched on this a little bit yesterday at the keynote. Best thing about being a FileMaker developer in my mind is not just that you're able to be creative, but you get to talk to people and solve their problems. And whether you're doing with other nerds that you're working with, that's great. But it's really the clients where you can come in and, a lot of the stuff I worked on in my previous before Proof was small to medium business. So let's say 100 or fewer employees. You really have a big impact. And that's been a wonderful thing. Finally, more than a personal note, what I love about FileMaker is that it allows me to pursue a passion, which is essentially I'm a nomad. And all I need is a laptop to work. I'm so much of a nomad that I've lived in Europe, North America, everywhere. But the past 7 years, up until last summer, I now live in Portland, Oregon. I lived in an Airstream, sold everything, and just went around North America for 7 solid years. And all I needed was to tether off my phone, open my laptop, whichever state or national park I was in, and I'm working. And it's just a beautiful thing. And that's my little FileMaker story. Let's dive in.
So speed and stability are indicators of performance, right? They're markers. Performance equals success, right? Performance itself is a very broad word. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But the idea of performance is the norm of a business. Companies want to meet the demands of an ever-changing market. Employees are relying on applications to provide evidence-based information for the decision makers. And having an efficient, reliable solution enhances satisfaction, which in turn leads to a competitive edge, which is what we're all looking for. What we're going to talk about today is less about the specific FileMaker techniques that you choose to use in your solutions and more about how to solve the problems and how to take the time to investigate and analyze your own information before you make a decision in the development process. We're going to talk a lot about shifting the processing time from a place where it's less impactful to your end users. Things like calculating the total line item value when it's saved rather than when it's retrieved. Or running a scripted update process when the user counts are lower so that, like at night, so that, again, you're not hanging up your server during the day while people are trying to interact with the file actively. So as Dirk and I were developing this presentation, we realized there is a lot that goes into a FileMaker solution. Not new, right? But like, how do you actually pinpoint those danger zones and decide on what is important and how to find those pain points, right? We initially developed our presentation into 3 kind of categories. So networking, infrastructure, code, and then UIX, right? So user experience and interface. And even within those silos, there was a lot to consider. Our mockup had like 30 different things on it. And those were just kind of like the touch points. They weren't even like the detailed information. We can't cover all of that today. There's just not enough time. There are, however, a lot of really great resources from previous FileMaker conferences, as well as the community, the Claris community, and talks that are actually going to be given in the next couple of days. If you're interested in the infrastructure, the hosting side of things, there were 2 really good talks in 2019. One was by Greg Lane, called Maximizing FileMaker Performance, and the other one was Chris Irvine, and his was called Fast Solutions Developed WAN First, right? They cover a lot in there about network latency, about pipelines, about reading and writing. There are even some tools in there about how you can extract data about the networks themselves, if that is a concern that you or your customers have. There's also other techniques specifically to FileMaker that can help improve upon performance. you were lucky enough to register for the Advanced Modern Transactions talk tomorrow with our coworkers Barbara and Aloe. That's at 10:30. They're going to talk a lot about how using a transactional method can really speed things up. On the user interface and experience side, Heather McHugh is doing a talk later this afternoon, and Alexis Allen is also doing one tomorrow. I highly recommend them both. They know a lot about user experience and have built their businesses around it. We're going to focus on 3 key areas for scalability. That's really what we're focusing on today. So leaner relationships, quicker queries, and benchmarking. Now, I know benchmarking can be kind of a divergent topic for people. Some people really believe in it, some people don't. I do because it helps lead you to more productive conversations, both within your team, but also with your customers. We'll talk about some stories in a minute. We're going to spend the majority of the rest of our talk here in our demo file, showing you examples of these 3 key areas. Dork's going to do 2 of them, and I'm going to do 1. So, would you like to introduce us to Snappy?
Okay. So we're going to spend a good portion of this not in Keynote. I love Keynote, but I don't love it as much as FileMaker. So we decided to build most of this actually in FileMaker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Snappy. That's our little demo file, which you guys can download. Let me go ahead and find Snappy. There he is. And needless to say, we've installed a few dad jokes in there too. I guess you can't see it. There we go. So we're going to cover 3 different topics. There are 3 different, 2 techniques, and also a little bit about benchmarking. Like Heather was saying, it's not really about the techniques, as we could be here all week, if not all month. The emphasis here is on the importance of speed, because as Heather was saying, performance is success. Doesn't really matter what your app does. If your client is sitting there staring at beach balls, they will lose confidence in this solution. So the reason I say this, because it should be self-evident, and I'll return to this again and again, is that everybody knows this. Yet every time we see a solution, we build one ourselves, it's rare that that solution is optimized fully. There's different reasons for that. We'll get into that a little bit. But before we get into the real stuff, let's start. Okay. Why did the Scarecrow win the race?
He was outstanding in his field. Sorry, I'm a ringer. I have a database of dad jokes.
Okay, so there's dad joke number 1. Let's see if you know them all. Okay. Before that, we'll do a quick show of hands here. Okay, can you guys think of a time when you're using so just no. Oh, you're hired. When that happens, what do they do? Right?
Yes.
We got coffee. The server. If the answer is yes, which if you've been developing as long as I have, is definitely a yes. That's a problem. It's a problem that doesn't need to exist. There are ways around it. Right? Yeah. Won't be able to cover all the details, but we'll cover one, and it'll illustrate a little bit of how you can dig into something and make it better. So one of my pet peeves is when what I call hops and calcs. Basically, it has to do with how is the data stored and how far away is it. So we built a little system we call Snappy, and Snappy is essentially a split personality pizzeria. We have a slow mode and we have a fast mode. Fast mode is the same data, same interface, except we have slow and fast. Fast slice and slow dough. This particular data we're looking at, just to give you a reference, because we'll be coming back to this again and again, it's just a simple dash looking at sales over 7 years time. The default filters on the left, there's a little thing by date and an end date with some nice little UI to pick things quickly, and all 21 locations of Snappy's pizzerias. So this is slow. Now, I will preface this, that when we were building this demo, it was on a server. Okay. We tried running it on the server here, and it is impossible. Because the connectivity here is it's just horrible. So this is going to run local, so we're going to use larger data sets to illustrate what's going on. But there is one thing that I can't illustrate that I was hoping to, which pertains to what we're looking at right now. So that you can see that the default is set to 1 day in the slow mode. We did that on purpose because if we defaulted to many more, you'll just be sitting staring at the screen while we're having this talk. One of the things that is immediately a problem with these portals, if you're looking at related calculated data, such as these sales totals here, or summaries thereof, is that when you scroll through this portal with the poorly built solution, even the scrolling is slow. This is extremely common. And basically what it's doing is caching. So as you scroll down, it's caching, it's caching, it's caching. And once you've done it for that, whatever portal set records you're looking at, if you do it again, it's going to be quick, right? For that one time, especially if you're showing summary values. In this case, if I scroll in this window, it's pretty quick. It's only 80. Even if I go, let's show a whole year. So I click year. This is year to date. It's showing 24. Let's go back a year. Now it's all of 23. You can see there's 27,000 plus sales orders. And even when I scroll now, it's pretty quick. So you'll just have to believe me that when that's on a host server, it's not quick. In our fast version, it is quick. So I'm sorry I can't demo that, but it is impressive. If you do it the way I'll explain in a second, as far as dealing with those fields that are calculated and far away, and you fix that, even the scrolling is very quick. The best way to figure that out, though, because the scrolling we didn't put on a timer, but we do have some other scripts on a timer, and we use a benchmarking tool to do that. The last part of this section, I'll talk more in depth about the benchmarking tool and how it's built and what its purposes are and how you can use it for you and your customers. But for now, we're just going to actually just run it. And we're going to demonstrate two scripts that do the same thing. So I have a script that shows the sales in list view. And what that means, so you can see that on the top right, shows sales in list view slow and shows sales in list view fast. And I'm going to go to my fast screen. I'm actually going to turn on these summary values for this entire data set of 27,000 records. And in the fast one, it's instantaneous. It's even instantaneous hosted. Again, we'll get to how this works in a second, but I want to show the difference in speed. So I'm going to do the slow one. And what these little scripts do, they live in a script table, and the parameters are embedded in each record, right? Each script that I want to have in the benchmark is in a script table. And I can say, which script am I calling? Which parameters am I using? And then time the whole thing in a wrapper. And the first one I'm going to do, all it does, it says, okay, go from the dash to the list view of these sales orders. That's all it's doing. I'm going to run it slow, and it's going to run it, and it's going to take a little while. Let's see, and the results will show up underneath once it's done. There we go. Whoop. I killed it.
You're clicking hard.
Yeah, so anyway, you can see the results there. It says 10 seconds, right? And it shows you which script I ran. And again, I'll get back to this later. And also, if I dig in, I can collect information about this. I can say who ran it, what machine, where were they, how many other users, all that other good stuff. We'll get into that a little bit later. So that particular script, going from the dash to the sales list in slow mode, took a certain amount of time. This will vary depending on what device you're on, what network you're on, all these other things. But at least you can test it and keep a record of this. So you guys are probably pretty familiar with benchmarking, but if you're not, this is exactly what it is. A/B testing, you can have people tested in different scenarios, all this stuff. Now I'm going to run the same thing, but in my fast mode. So this is taking advantage of different techniques, and it's going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to click here and see how long that takes. 1 second. So it did the exact same thing, but it did it faster. And I had to have a pretty large data set because if you're running local or you're developing on-prem, it's sometimes hard to pick up on these performance issues because it's running so quickly for you. You may also not have a sufficient data set. You may not have something built to just create random records for you so you can stress test the system. And this is something that should basically be part of any developer's arsenal. You just have this and do this. Because the last thing you want to do is, it works perfectly for me, give to the user, and say, well, it doesn't work perfectly for me. It's like, well, it's really on the developer. They should have stress tested it. They should have benchmarked it, all these things. Anyway, so that's what we did here, and we see a great difference. The reason this is important, if I go back to the dash, I'm looking at a lot of data here. And maybe, as a user, this list is not terribly informative. Maybe I want a chart of this list. Well, charts are essentially nothing but summaries. So they're summarizing data. And so if I look at that chart, I want that to be as fast as this was. This is a whole year, and I can toggle through anything I want to do. And I can even change this to, let's say, 2017. When I do that, it's still super quick. These were quarters, months, whatever, years. And this is quick posted. So let me show you how that works, because the trick is, of course, not to use any calc or unstored data. Everything is stored. Everything is what I call static versus dynamic data, and we keep it close. So let's take a quick look at that under what I call calcs and hops. So what is the problem with calcs and hops? We were just at this dash, and we're looking at related data. This is a simple representation of the graph. We have sales, line items, products, and locations. Within each table, you have certain fields. You have static fields, which are just, they don't count. Or you're using calculation fields, which if you transition from a spreadsheet to FileMaker, it's the first thing you do because it's so great. Like, I'm just use calc fields because they're awesome. They always work. They're perfect. I don't need to script a thing. Problem is, it'll slow your system down. So the solution, if something is far away, like products, we don't have any calcs in there. It's really an auxiliary table. Then we have line items and look at certain things, like a product, maybe the core price. You add a quantity, you get an extension. Now we have those values. And if they're calcs, it's great, but it's not great. Especially if those calcs, now I'm in sales, it's deeper, right? I'm pulling some of these calc fields that live in sales, the table itself, but some of them are actually from the line items. So now I have not just calcs in one table, I have calcs in a table that's far away, one hop away. And if I'm at the dash, like we were looking at initially, now I'm looking at data that is essentially calculated and farther away. And if you get to around, I would say it depends a little bit, but 3 or 4 hops, you can forget it. They'll just stop. 5, you're done. And so that comes down to your graph and how you set that up. And the only thing I'll say there is that when you set up a graph, there's beautiful and correct, and then there's fast. You can, if your schema and your graph is precious to you, because it is perfectly normalized, it is exactly the way it should be for you, which there is no one way. I've never seen 2 developers come up with the exact same schema for anything. But what is important is that you sometimes make allowances for speed. As a matter of fact, I promote that you should always make allowances for speed, because when it comes to the user, that is everything. And so if that means changing your schema and messing with your fields and controlling the values programmatically as opposed to just embedded into the field itself, then do that. You can do it on auto enter, that's the simplest way. But you can also do it where you essentially recount values when they get touched. So either one-off, and this is a simple example with invoices and sales, but it could be inventory, it could be anything. If you've done any ERPs, any solutions to run businesses, you're dealing with a lot of data, and there's usually a lot of users touching that data. If it's calculated, it's all taken care of, but it's slow. If it's not calculated, you need to control how they're touching that data. And you may want to run scripts even overnight or whatever that just clean up stuff and move stuff around. So you clean up the data so it's not calculations. And you try to get it closer. So let's take a look at the solution. So what you want to do is you want to get rid of all those red count fields. You can do that like I was just talking about programmatically or with another. There's other styles to do this too, but when you do it, the difference is profound. The speed, especially hosted, is, can't believe it. I have one solution that I built for a wholesale produce company in Southern California. They have 3 locations, 3 warehouses from LA up to Big Sur. They deal with, I don't know how much data, a tremendous amount of data. Thousands of accounts, many hundreds of thousands of invoices per month. And they have to do their aging report. And their aging report changes day by day because it's aging based on different terms for different accounts, for different invoices, et cetera, that are fully paid, partially paid, all these things. When I first helped them, their aging report was something they ran once a month only, and it took literally an hour plus. So they knew when it happened. Only the controller was allowed to do it, because the whole system would just die. And it would do the aging for, whatever, 5,000 accounts. Very important report. It tells them essentially how well are we doing. We changed it to this strategy. This is all we did. We applied this strategy and essentially made all the, what we call the account status on every single invoice all the time. Whenever it got touched, it updated everything, what the balance was, what was due, what was paid, and all the terms for the account itself. So it would look based on 30-day, 60-day, 90-day debts, all these things, and update these things programmatically. So now when they run the agent report, it literally takes a second. So it went from an hour to a second by essentially deploying this. Final thing you want to do is remove hops. So what we call essentially warehousing. Sometimes you want to take data, especially legacy data, stuff that will not change anymore. Sales from yesterday, sales from last month, not going to change. Summarize it with a script, take the load off of them every time. When they run a report, they're taking that hit. If you take that hit one time by moving that data into a warehouse, you do that hit for them. And then every time anyone needs a report or slice and dice it any which way they want, which we'll go back to the charts in a second, it's done because you flattened the data and you moved it closer to wherever you want it to be. And so the speed is phenomenal. And this is a simple technique. Trust me, if you talk to any developer, they're going to talk to you about things that are much more interesting than this. But this works every time. And the difference is huge. So this is my favorite thing to do because it's simple. And the user difference is phenomenal. If someone walks away for an hour for a report and then you show them it happens in a second, they can't believe it. You have a customer for life at that point. So this is a huge thing. And it's demonstrated, I show the charts a little bit, but it's demonstrated in these charts. This is 2017 through 23. And I can bump to any type of chart. I can turn the summaries on or off. If I go back to list view. And it's just like that. Again, it's more impressive online because it happens even hosted. We had it on a little dev server shared with, so our CEO, Ernest, he was doing an AI demo. They're actually doing it right now. So he was bogging down this dev server with whatever him and Corn were coming up with. I don't even know what they were doing. But even with that, and we could tell because it was slightly slower, it was still seconds as opposed to minutes. So this is a great technique that I can definitely recommend to everybody. Again, I'll get back to the benchmarking a little later. But counts and hops is a wonderful thing. And there's 1,000 techniques. We don't have time to touch them all. But I do love talking about them. So if you guys find me later, we'll definitely talk about them. For now, I'm going to hand it back over to Heather.
Thanks, Dirk. So I'm going to go back to the dashboard. Let's do a quick shout out. There are lots of different methods for querying data in FileMaker. What are your favorites?
OData.
Data API. Sorry, I heard another one.
OData.
OData, okay. How about some more classic ones?
Fine.
Find mode. Right? Maybe execute SQL. There are a lot of different options out there. Right? Again, we're not talking about what you're choosing your option to be. We're saying prioritize the performance of your options. Right? The other thing to note about data, querying data, working in reports is we've already talked a little bit about how, right, there's networks, there's code, there's UIX that all impacts performance, right? There's also different engines, right? So FileMaker has an engine, FileMaker client. FileMaker server has a slightly different engine. FileMaker Go has a slightly different engine, right? We have a solution that we inherited.
It wasn't us.
I pretty much work in inherited solutions and do a lot of the discovery, the sleuthing on the pain points, right? Like, why are these things slow? This particular solution was developed for WebDirect, and in WebDirect, it's an ace. There are just no problems, right? Client wants to use it in FileMaker Pro though, and it's a very different situation there. So we have been working together to try to institute some of these changes, right? And one of the big pain points for them is actually queries and reporting. Because the method that was built into the system, again, it works great in WebDirect, but it doesn't work the same way in FileMaker Pro, so you have to make some adjustments. So let's dig a little bit into the queries and finds. First, my word of advice in this section is basically be flexible, right? Not one size fits all for every situation. And you also have to know your client, right? The acceptable outcome for one client might not be the same acceptable outcome for another. We have a customer who wants all of his data on the screen, easy, doesn't care if it looks pretty. Because to him, the data is more important. And we have other clients that the UI/UX, the actual look and feel of the system is much more important than, and being able to control where the data gets changed or interacted with is much more important than how much of it's actually on an individual screen, right? So you need to know those stories. I am going to, right, so Dirk already touched on the problem here, right? In Slowdo, we're operating off of a bunch of calced fields and a bunch of different hops. So I'm going to run a standard find here with a year's worth of data. Again, this is a very different situation hosted than it is local. So this is why I'm doing a bigger data set. We have about 20, just under 28,000 records here. And I am going to run this find and get our benchmark number, right? One of the things that Dirk and I discovered as we were developing this file was even machines have a big difference, right? So Dirk's machine, which is what we're operating on, has an M1 chip. My machine, which I was developing on, does not. And we were getting very different results, right? He's also in Seattle-ish, Portland area.
Seattle-ish.
Right? And I'm in Grand Rapids, right? The infrastructure is just different. Fiber versus Wi-Fi, right? Hardwired versus, tethered on a phone. It all makes a difference. So a year's worth of data run locally here is about 9 seconds. That's not bad, but, most people don't want to wait for a report.
That's local.
Yes.
Yeah.
This particular report is just a simple sub-summary of the item that's available, all of the locations in this particular case, and then sorted by the profit level of the items. So you can scroll through this, and it's a pretty basic report. But again, it's important information for businesses to be able to decide, oh, I'm going to continue to offer this product, or, oh, I need to offload this particular ingredient, so I should really, put some more marketing out for this item that isn't selling as well, right? Like, making business decisions should be data-based. If we go to fast mode, right? So now we are in this solution style of graphing, right? So the data is all closer. We're using auto enter calcs, and then we're just summarizing from there. So I'm going to run the same report, same data.
Quick at the desktop.
Okay. We're going to run another find. This one's going to be, hopefully, slightly faster. Also about 9 seconds. Great.
All information is good information when you're benchmarking.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely right. So in this particular case, what we are doing is passing a set of parameters and starting in the context of the report that we want to open in, right? So we're talking about items. We want to sub-summarize items and profit. But the sales are where we have to get the data from. So in this first example of just doing a native find, we're starting in the context of items. We're using the graph to go through and find the sales. We are looping through the sales dates and locations that were provided, and then we're sub-summarizing with the sorts. This next version, we're gonna see kind of a similar result, right? The difference here is we're gonna run the same find, but we're gonna run it in sales first. And then we're gonna go to the related records and items table to sub-summarize. Again, you may or may not see a huge difference between these two techniques. I'm not telling you that these are the way to do it. I'm just saying be aware of it and collect the data. All right, so that one's also about 9 seconds. Same report, same data. And then let's run it using the method that Dirk was talking about, right? So this GTRR filter down here is the same product summary that I'm going to run. So we're using much closer data and things are cached. So it is going to be even faster, right? So we go to a 2-second difference here. Okay.
So that one uses a warehousing technique.
This is actually not a warehousing technique. So we mentioned the warehousing technique as a possibility, but we didn't actually institute it in this file, right? I would love to have had the time to like build that out and actually see the differences, right? But this one is not using the warehousing technique specifically. So the data is not going to a separate table to just kind of be stored. So, you know, data should be easily accessible to your users, right? That's what reporting is all about. And we want you to be able to think about and prioritize how you can access data on large historical sets, right? We're talking about scalability, right? A little mom and pop shop that, you know, only has a few records created every day is going to be a very different situation from Dirk's example of the client who's doing, you know, hundreds of thousands of records in a month. And you have to be conscientious about how you develop in those kinds of situations. So I'm happy to talk more about this. I have seen a ton of different methods of queries. I have not dug into data API and OData. I'm sorry, I'm not the person to talk to you about that, but I can point you in the right direction.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So if you're doing a query, if you guys were hosted and it wasn't 9 seconds, it was 2 minutes, what are you seeing? Just the spin, or are you seeing a dialogue as well?
So the combination.
Yeah, you're
Depending
seeing
on-
both.
So in this particular case, all the 9s are different hosted
Yeah.
because of different things, they do not show up on local. The summarizing does on everything, but the actual find bit takes longer on a host than it does here.
Yeah, I was seeing numbers like 29 seconds for a find, 26 for a find in a GTR, and then 2 for the filter
And the
GTR.
dialogue would be up there saying,
It would, at the end of the
great
first,
data or
yeah.
something.
Yeah,
Just
sometimes
to be
you'll see the find dialogue, other times you'll see the, you know, the sort dialogue, sorting the records for the sub-summary part.
And that was for a much smaller data set hosted.
Yeah.
So we had to bump it just for this local
Yeah.
demo. But that's why those scripts which we had pre-built, they were actually different speeds. But today they're not, except for the last one, which is fundamentally different. And that was also around 1 or 2 seconds hosted. So the difference is even starker. It's hosted on that last method.
Thanks.
What's happening?
You're doing a lot of benchmarking for.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
You're doing a lot of benchmarking for searching and summary. Do you look at inserting data? Because the way I look at what you're trying to do, I suppose inserting data will get slower. I'm not sure you're looking at it in that particular case, but I'm just, as you have this issue too.
So this is a really good question, and this comes down to techniques and different techniques. So this harks back to what we're talking about. There are many of them. And the point here isn't necessarily which technique we're going to use. The point is that you are able to insert them into a benchmarking tool, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and test them all. Because that is really the takeaway from this. You know, all of us love figuring out things and working and digging in and figuring, you know, like, how about this? How about this technique and that technique? That's great. That's what we do for a living. But the takeaway here is the importance of doing that as opposed to actually solving this particular issue that we're looking at right now. So that's where the benchmarking comes in.
All right, so I wanna give Dirk a chance to talk to all of you to dance. Dirk's gonna dance.
Oh, I thought you were Dan.
So let me close out my session with another joke. Julian, quiet.
Everybody but Julian.
What do you call it when two horses date? Anybody? A stable relationship. And with all those movies, we're
Oh, that was another one for me.
Yeah, there you go.
Put my eyeball back in. There we go. Okay, let's do another show of hands. Who knows what benchmarking is? Everybody? Kind of, nearly everybody. Okay, that's good. I'll ask you one more question. Who here uses a purpose-built benchmarking tool, whether you build it yourself or a third party? Okay, so not everybody. Well, that's good, because benchmarking is kind of the cherry on the cake, right? It's what it's all about. So let's take a quick look at this benchmarking and talk about it. So you saw the tool that we have up here. You've seen a few tests that we've run. The idea here is to understand the importance of setting up a tool like this to log accurate speeds, whatever they may be. And it could be, you just line up the different techniques, and if you're into data, you'll get into this. Because you'll try everything. You'll get honest feedback. Now, saying that, the feedback changes, like Heather was talking about. It depends on which machine you're using, where you are, where the data center is, what the hosting do, what other people are doing on the server, all these things. But that's fine, because you collect as much data as you can to use, not just to help you analyze the problem and come up with better solutions when you do A/B testing or you tweak the script, maybe change parameters. You can put them all into the script table and run them. But you also want to be able to have data that you can share internally, but also to your customer. Because when you actually do make something that works better, unless it's just so phenomenal, they're like, yeah, that is awesome. But sometimes even a marginal gain that can be shown consistently is huge. And so you want to be able to show that. I also like benchmarking, especially a tool like this, where the results and the scripts live in their own tables, because it's not session-based. In other words, that data stays there. And you can also get it from the user. You can literally have them on the phone or Zoom or whatever you're using and say, okay, you're on that app, hit the benchmarking tool, go to that script and run that script. And I will have information. So here, when I click on any of the results, this is a very simple pop-up, but I'm just gathering metadata on that particular script that ran. And so I can find out who is a user, the system version device, whatever get attribute you want to throw in there, you can get. Right, and if there's more than here, there's very clever ways of getting other data. And then if it's something beyond me, I just talk to Angelo, who's our infra guy, and they say, okay, what else can we gather? And there's tools to look at, general performance. But I love this because it helps us analyze pretty quickly what's going on. And I love it because it allows our customers to do the same thing. You run it and let's see what's going on. And if it's only their station and nobody else's station at that facility, well, then I'm already narrowing down the problem. Maybe it's not the code at all. So this benchmarking, the collection of this data, is a huge thing. So let me show you a little bit how this works. We have a little script table. Literally, these scripts, we just keep them here. I give it a name so I understand what I'm running. I tell it which layout it's going to run so I can run it agnostically, and that allows me to schedule on server too. No matter where this is being called, whether it's by a user or whatever, but also I can basically set benchmark scripts to run overnight if I want to, for example. But I make sure that they're always in the script table itself is saying, where do you need to start in order to do this? Of course, it has a script name, which script name is calling, and then whatever script parameter we're using. So whether it's old school with, just words in the script parameter, or we're using a JSON, it's all good. Whatever it is in there, throw it in there, and you can run that script. So which script is it? Never remember. It is, run speed test. So this is script. This is all just wrapping, right? We're setting parameters either through JSON or, again, old school. Then we essentially say, okay, start your timer. And then it says, do your thing. Usually, particular scripts, it goes this, but here's the key. This is the actual script in the script tables that it's calling. So this entire script that you see here, run speed test, is a wrapper. That's all it is. And this is something I can control with my little script. I build these benchmarking scripts, but obviously you probably would. You set it up and you run it. And then at the end, of course, when it's done, it collects the final timestamps and all that stuff, closes the window. And the result is essentially what you see here. So if I run this fast again, you'll see, boom, 0 seconds. That was great. Right? So that's all that the benchmarking is doing. I don't think, we go back. I don't think you can do meaningful improvements to a system without benchmarking. Because it's just guesswork. And it's so variable per user, per machine, per network, per everything. It's hard to tell if you're actually doing anything good. You don't know which data sets. Ideally, you could build the scripts that where you define the data set. You say, I need this amount of records, right? You could build that into your script table. Just extra parameters, extra fields in the script table, the things that that script would call within the wrapper. So these are all things you can control and have anybody run at any time, including server side. You can just put in a schedule and say, every night I want to see this, because if something goes wrong with my inventory table, whatever else, I'll know. I'll know before the client does, hopefully, and then we can deal with it. So that's where the benchmarking comes in. This one we just built within FileMaker. Because I like building stuff without anything, just FileMaker, and see how far I get. But there are other tools. Actually, Eric, I don't know if he's doing a feature flag thing, and he talks about feature flag is kind of related to this a little bit, but he also talks using that for benchmarking. And he has some great external tools for all that stuff. So if you're into testing and controlling what you deliver to your users, I would recommend the feature flag that he's talking about. It's a very good session. So that's our benchmarking. I will finish with joke. Then we will hop out back to our keynote, and then we probably have time for a few questions. And but before we do that, bad joke. Final one. Why did the programmer quit his job? Crashed. Didn't get a raise. Back to Ken.
That hurt us.
In the session about Eric.
I don't know off the top of my head though.
It's something like just.
It's
like
feature flags.
feature flags.
I think so.
I think it's tomorrow.
Okay, so just to reiterate, performance equals success. Are we all on the same page there? Yeah. Speed and stability are the foundations of success. Can't tell you the number of times I've heard a customer say, oh, FileMaker crashed. Okay, well, let's figure out what that means, right? Very broad statement, but it's an important statement because it's a place where you can acknowledge that something is going wrong and that you want to partner with your customer to fix it. Sometimes those are quick answers and sometimes they're not. Right? It is more important to our customers and our clients that we serve them in the best way possible. And to do that, we need to give ourselves data and opportunities to be able to make educated decisions in our development process, right? This is about creating scalable, fast, reliable solutions for our customers and being able to do it consistently. The actual solution might be different in each case, but being able to do it on a regular basis is so important. Important for our customers, and it's important for our own businesses. Thank you all so much for coming. We will take questions here in a minute. Beforehand, I just want to let you know that we will be going to office hours after the talk here. So that's another room on this floor called Yellow Bullhead. I don't know where it is, so I'm gonna have to find it. So I guess you can follow us if you want to chat with us some more. The other thing I'll mention is if you haven't been to the Proofgeist booth yet, please go and collect your trading cards
Oh, yes, Bob.
and pick your superpowers.
And superpowers. You get two, so you keep one, you can give one away.
And thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
No, I have to run, so when you're done. Got it.
Yes. Couple, okay. You got invoicing, file, you've got line items, quantity, unit price extension. So you're saying don't make the extension a calculation field, make it an auto enter.
Correct.
Okay. Now you got your total invoice at the bottom, which you're adding up all your extension files. Are you doing a script trigger every time you change that? You're doing a script trigger to redo the bottom one down here? Would that be
Bottom,
what
what's
you're
that
doing?
again? What's the bottom one you're talking about?
Total invoice.
Summary?
The summary of your line item extension. So how are you updating that?
It's fast enough if everything else is static.
Okay.
Because, yeah, that would be a pain to do.
Yeah.
But in my experience, even with large data sets, even hosted,
Yeah.
everything else is what I just call it static because it's easier.
So so the rule that you just said is 2 calculations, don't do. 1 calculation, you're okay with. Because
In this particular instance.
in this instance, you're calculating from a calculation that's slow.
Exactly.
But if you're just calculating from
Correct.
straight data, that's fast.
Yeah, this is
Try
not
not to do 2
Exactly.
jumps.
This is not a dogma where you do no calculations, even though that is a goal of mine. Calculations can be
We
great.
disagree on that a little bit.
They should be used in certain situations.
Yeah.
But if they're relying on other calculated fields, certainly that are many hops away, you're going to get into trouble really quickly, especially with large data sets.
Yeah.
And a lot of the solutions I build deal with large data sets. We're not building a clever widget that does a little thing. It's high traffic, high volume, millions of records. In that case, you don't have the luxury of just throwing a calc in. Everything needs to be there needs to be a little more rigor involved in thinking about how you're programming because it's all about speed. Because the problem, if it slows down, that's annoying, but it does more than just being annoying. It takes away the confidence in the application itself, especially if that speed is so slow, it starts crashing servers. So now you have people that are using they're not just annoyed by your solution, they don't know if it's the right solution, and they will look for better answers somewhere else. And that's really sad because I've seen it, because people are, well, they'll straight up say, well, FileMaker is slow.
Yeah.
FileMaker isn't slow, or let's put it this way, FileMaker doesn't need to be slow. And that's where it falls down. They'll say, well, we'll sit down with someone and the client is looking at it and it's spinning. Was like, does it always do that? Like, oh yeah. They know when they're expert users. They don't know how to develop, but they're expert users. They know exactly when they can go get a cup of coffee, right? But they become used to it because they've been told, well, we can't fix that. And that's the point of this whole session. You can fix it, but you may have to step away from how you've been building things and change essentially the architecture to accommodate speed, not just accommodate, but put it in front. And it can be done. I mean, there's going to be situations where it can't, fine. But as a rule, I have yet to run into a system where people have complained about the speed that we can't make better. And the only reason is not because we're smarter, it's because we're making it a priority. And if we have to move things around to get that speed, then that's what we're going to do. Because in the end, the user doesn't care how you built it. They don't care. They care about the experience. So if you can make the experience the thing, you're already doing better than when you are making it the thing.
None of
Sorry, I'll get to you in a second.
Have you doing things like save a compressed copy, like maintenance stuff like that? Is there something like on every database we do a compressed copy once a month or something like that to speed things up? Or
Not to speed things up, no. No, the answer is no.
Right.
There's different ways to do that, but I've not. If you handle your data correctly, you shouldn't have to compress it to speed it up. It should just be fast no matter how many records you're having. As I said, you should do file maintenance. You should make sure your file's healthy, all this other stuff. But as a technique to make it faster, no.
Next up with this are the benchmarking. You never want to go crazy on logging everything that happens, but for specific scripts, you might have a tolerance. for execution time with a start time and an end time. It goes over that, then log it with logging metadata of the user, the environment, layout. That way you can get notified proactively if there are systematic problems or if there are specific problems that are user specific.
That's an excellent point. We didn't really touch on that, but that's where you take your benchmarking. It becomes part of the normal experience. It's just embedded in there. We do that with one of the apps you talked about. And it really helps us. One, you can put triggers on there. It's like, now it's a problem. But more importantly, if something happens retroactively, we know we have a log of it, right? Because this was a manual trigger of a benchmark because we're actively doing some testing. But doing that is a great tool as well because it's just, may not do it for all your scripts, but you do it for key scripts. And you just say, look, every time it runs, we have another table that keeps the records of what happened. So when they say, hey, it's been slow, we look at it, and this has happened. They say, it seems really slow. And we say, oh, really? And we look at all the times they ran that script themselves for the past month. And we say, the average on that is not great, but it's not changed. And we can tell you it's not changed. So it's basically, it's just, maybe today it just feels slower, but it's actually not. Or you use it like I think where you were saying, where it becomes a trigger for you to take action.
Well, my follow-up, the complaint of FileMaker is slow. For us, it's often, we're reliant on external APIs, which perform at different levels at different times.
Yeah.
So we do our own, almost a microservice of testing those services.
Yes.
So we can proactively let people know this task is going to take longer because a downstream system is having difficulty. And it's not pointing the finger at FileMaker is slow today.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of this because it's a big world out there. We touched on one thing of one, it's a fraction of a percent of, it's nothing. But you have just the methods of dealing with data to outside sources and back, whether whether FileMaker is actually looking, or maybe you put it in a separate table and use webhooks, or what we use Simple Queue, where you don't need, it's not taking the load all the time. It's able to share it, parse it out in a more manageable manner. So there's a million different ways to make this better. But the key, of course, is like you need to be able to focus on it, make it important, and track it. Yeah.
So you want to, let's say, denormalize to get speed enhancement. So maybe you're caching fields in the parent table or warehouse. Right? So at a certain point, you start to wonder about trade-offs, right? So could you talk a little bit about that, like when there's too many fields in the table or too much data is bloated the file size, or the graph becomes a lot to negotiate on logging, and
Yeah, that's pretty subjective too, because I think the most important thing for me, you don't want tables with 1 million fields as a rule, but you want the fields that are necessary. You want them in the place that makes the most sense. And that sometimes may result in a table with quite a few fields. And that in and of itself to me is not a problem, as long as they're all fulfilling a function that makes sense. What you don't want is where, again, there's a lack of what I call rigors. Like, this happens all the time. Customer will ask for something. They want it now. There's a quick way of doing it, and there's a right way of doing it. They're not giving you an option, so you do it the quick way. One time, there may be a little bit like, well, it's not as fast as it should be, but it's good enough, and it's a new feature, and everyone's happy. But you do that again and again and again over time. Maybe different developers come in, and all of a sudden, you have a solution, a legacy solution that's very, very difficult to fix. And it's because it's been neglected. So that's, again, I know I keep saying, but that is the important message, is to, if possible, because sometimes you have no choice. The client will say, do this, and you're going to wind up with tables and fields that don't make sense. But you made the fix that was important then for the client. Ideally,
Medical debt.
Ideally you push back as much as you can to give them your expertise as to, yes, that does work for you, and I'm glad the CEO is happy. But you're going to run into problems because you're thinking about speed, scale, all this stuff. And as long as you keep doing that, you will have a successful solution and you will have happy customers. Yes.
Question about the variability of experience between other apps. So most of the time, customers would just quickly blame FileMaker, it's slow, or the solution is slow, but it's simply because they are running other apps, which is squeezing out the RAM from the FileMaker. I mean, how do you manage the expectation of a user's point of view when they're running, say, for example, Chrome here, and it's using like 16 gigs of RAM, and there's basically nothing left for FileMaker to function?
There's no easy answer, because basically you're handling people as opposed to tech. You need a project manager, you say, you talk to them.
That's when I come in and I say, hey, Dirk, I need you to.
That's a really good question. And the answer, there is no simple answer because it's not about your solution. It's about how they're using it with outside things that are hogging resources. And yours is just one example with a browser, that has how many tabs or whatever. It could be a myriad of things. You don't control it. So the best you could do is try to talk to them and explain it. And with the benchmarking, demonstrates like this is how it would work if you weren't doing those things. It's up to you whether you want to do those things. Again, the benchmark is your friend because otherwise you're just having a subjective conversation back and forth. And nobody's going to get, happy from that. But if you can show them, it's like, oh, you talking about this feature? The one I'm running on your machine right now? Let's quit everything, hit it now, because you run it on them. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, why don't you open everything up again with your 40 tabs? Run it again. There it is. And now it's not FileMaker. When we get the same thing, it's like, well, Google's fast. Well, yeah. Back there.
We actually need to transition
Oh,
out
I'm
of this
sorry.
room. So we
Okay.
are at
Thank you,
time.
everybody. Really appreciate it.